Welcome to Body Kindness. I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, creator of the Body Kindness Philosophy book and audiobook. I'm here to help you create a better life by reinventing health from the body oppressive, shaming, and you'll never be enough type of mindset to positive and joyful ways that you can spiral up your energy, mood, and your well-being at any size, shape, or weight, and as you are right now. Get started for free at bodykindnessbook.com/start. That's the sound of me smashing a stack of scales in front of some friends. And I have to say that breaking up with the scale and all the other ways I was judging, monitoring, and measuring my worth was absolutely pivotal in my life. Creating the body kindness philosophy and letting myself be a human being again helped me become a better mom, a better clinician, and a happier and healthier person. I believe we all have a right to decide how we want to care for ourselves, and I think we all need support in figuring out what that looks like. You don't have to do this alone. There's a whole community of like-minded people who are fed up with diets, who are embracing intuitive eating, and who are completely redefining their lives from body shame to body kindness. You are not broken. Our culture is. Find your inner caregiver and create a better life with body kindness.
Hello, my name is Gloria Oladipo. I'm a student at Cornell University. I work as a freelance writer for places like Teen Vogue, Healthline, and other publications. I want to thank Nita for the opportunity to speak with you all this afternoon. Eating disorder survivors are usually represented in numbers and statistics. We are rarely empowered to share our own stories, especially survivors of color, so I'm very grateful. Moreover, I want to thank the supporters in my life today, represented by my dad. Thank you for joining me on this journey. My eating disorder is such a lecherous part of my life. It's like there are two parts of me at war with each other. The Gloria that is interested in art, pop culture, politics, writing, versus the Gloria that counts calories, the Gloria that overexercises, the Gloria that binges and purges, abuses laxatives, and continually oscillates between well and sick because of symptom use. My eating disorder trapped me over and over again. There is this pop culture belief about how people get eating disorders. Compared to what you might think, I didn't get it following a pro-Ana blog or staring at emaciated models in a magazine. It started because of my school. Elementary school was the first time I learned about good and bad foods. We learned that white carbs were something to be scared of, that we should meticulously monitor the amount of sugar that we ate, as well as the fat. We learned about calorie counting and the ever-present goal of staying lean. No one even mentioned the words eating disorder, only obesity epidemic. Fat phobia was essential to this lesson. They warned us that obesity kills, gives us cancer, diabetes, frightening ailments that we barely understood. But the crux of the lesson was, don't be fat, don't be fat, don't be fat. You could be skinny and diabetic, weigh fish and have high cholesterol, but to dare and be fat was to be sick, stigmatized, and socially quarantined. We learned that constant exercise was good, correct. In gym class, we were graded on the amount of pull-ups that we could do and sit-ups we could perform in our school's makeshift weight room. We were marked on if we worked out for a certain amount of time, if we could do an increasing amount of reps week to week. Sometimes we'd work out in pairs or alone, but sometimes we would be forced to exercise as a group, bearing witness to more thinner classmates who could complete rep after rep after rep after rep without the shame of a reddening face or quickened breath. To measure our progress, we were instructed to do weekly weigh-ins to be handed in to my gym teacher, forcing us to weigh ourselves in front of our peers. Even as early as 6th grade, I already felt shame melding into an unfiltered hatred for my body. I had fussed up my weight every week, using my thinner classmates' weight as a goal. When you live with the core belief that you are fat, and therefore the world defines you as disgusting, ugly, unworthy, and shameful, everything gets accommodated to fit that viewpoint. When my teacher cast me as a dour school nurse in our 8th grade play, I assumed it was because I was unattractive. When the teacher called me a stage hog for speaking too much in class, I figured she thought I was piggish. Every slight failure, disappointment, fight with a friend, doing poorly on a test, every problem in my middle school life felt like a direct result of being too fat. At first, I made peace with my fat girl label. I was the one who volunteered to take home class party leftovers, the girl with no sense of style, who wore baggy clothes because there was no point in caring. I tried to isolate my pain away, cry it away, lash it away, share self harm it away, but to no end. Then, as I graduated eighth grade and transitioned into high school, I found some peace, finally through disordered eating. The part of me still believed that I had so much to offer the world. I was funny, kind, smart, brave. I was just trapped in the wrong vessel, in a body I deemed as defunct and repulsive. Why not just change my body? I was desperate for self love and kindness that I could only offer to myself. I jumped into my eating disorder because I thought it was loving myself. Of course, I wasn't the only one supporting my eating disorder. High school, the land of social tears and cliques, puberty and angst, and the ever complicating relationships, was the perfect place for my eating disorder to flare up. I had friends constantly complaining about their size or trying to eat healthier, aka restrict, but I also had teachers continually making inappropriate comments about weight, food, and body. My freshman year science teacher, with no nutritional background or training, took it upon himself to instruct us on what was healthy to eat or not, even going as far as to shame the food we brought into class. I remember him giving a verbal flogging to a girl over her fruit snacks. My cross country coach sophomore year would fat shame us constantly, telling us that throwing up after the end of a run, a sign of overextension, was the only way to know we were committed during practice. He also let me know that on more than one occasion, I would be such a great runner if I would lose weight. There were countless teachers who would police the dress code out of heavier students, teachers that would find ways to chip at our self esteem, or constantly talk about their diets. All these years later, the impact of their words still matter. At first, it started out small. I skipped breakfast and lunch. But when you have an eating disorder, there is no ceiling for weight loss. There is no enough. Your goal weight becomes the body you feel most fat in. You say it'll work out for an hour, only for 5 to go by. We are people who do not understand limits, who think perfection is a livable reality. That's why this disease is so dangerous, why it kills so many of us every year, every month, every day. And eating disorder isn't something that you outgrow. It isn't an illness you age out of. If you don't find treatment, you're not recovering. And if you're not recovering, you're dying. When I started my freshman year of college, my eating disorder only got more sophisticated. I had the added stress of being farther away from home, with this added sense of freedom, but larger responsibilities. Cornell University is an environment that encourages a lack of work life boundaries. My eating disorder flourished under the pressure to find myself, to find my future career path, find my social circle, future partner, as well as get a 4.0. My life got smaller so much quickly. My life got so smaller so much more quickly. A year later, as my health, both physical and mental, continued to nosedive, I finally was ready to get help. However, no one around me had the tools to support me. My parents had only been educated on the obesity epidemic. No one taught them about the warning signs of eating disorders, what to look out for, or where to go if their child needed help. No one even told them that a disease most commonly associated with emaciated rich white women could happen to an average weight middle class black girl. The lack of information on eating disorders is deadly. It has taken over 6 years of my life to dig out of the deepest parts of my disorder. I have spent holidays, my last two birthdays, my summer and winter breaks in treatment centers. My family and I are still paying off debts accumulated from residential programs, outpatient, hospital tests, blood tests, and other attempts at wellness. I had passed on full paid trips to Paris and China to get help because I was more afraid of the food than excited for the countries I would be visiting. My proudest moments are tarnished by eating disorder. Purging in my hotel room when I won a scholarship to visit DC for a week, screenshotting an image of myself accepting my full tuition award to Cornell, and circling the parts of my body I found most disgusting. So much of my life is warped and colored by this illness to the point where I can't tell you what happened between my sophomore year of high school and my second semester of sophomore year. Besides, I had an eating disorder, and it took up a lot of space. I wish I could tell you that after all the things my family and I have sacrificed for recovery, I am healed. I wish I could tell you that I don't have bad body image days, that I don't struggle with overexercise anymore, restriction. I wish I could tell you that I won't ever relapse again, and that I won't have to spend another night in a residential center sleeping in a bed that isn't mine. I wish I could tell you that I don't reach for eating disorder symptoms when I don't feel anything because the world always feels like it's almost too much. I wish I could tell you no more treatment, no more therapy groups, no more checkups. I wish I could tell you that I'm over this, that my eating disorder was an inconvenient chapter of my life that has since closed. There are times when it feels like I'm at the mercy of a self-hate spiral. I often do feel hopeless, knowing how labored and non-linear recovery feels. However, opportunities like this to share my story and testify about the importance of eating disorder education and prevention make me stronger, hopeful. Eating disorders have some of the highest mortality rates out of any other mental illness, with most people receiving no treatment whatsoever. The federal government, in congruent action with the states, has a responsibility to educate parents and educators about how to spot this illness in the children, teenagers, and young adults in their everyday lives. You have the power to make sure educators do not trigger disordered eating in children and instead create a solid foundation for a lifelong of positive body image and strong mental health. Thank you.
That was Gloria Oladipo. She's a 20-year-old Black woman and eating disorder survivor. She works as a freelance writer and has been published in Teen Vogue, Healthline, Wear Your Voice, Bitch Media, Bustle, and other publications. She usually writes about her personal experiences at the intersections of mental health, race, and gender, as well as politics, pop culture, and TV and film. Moreover, Gloria is a current junior at Cornell University studying government with a minor in Arabic, English with a minor in creative writing, and performing arts. Gloria has struggled with an eating disorder for over 5 years and began seeking recovery her freshman year of college. She uses her writing to speak candidly about her experiences with her eating disorder and comorbid illnesses, as well as her experience in the eating disorder diagnosis and treatment process as a Black woman. In her free time, Gloria enjoys reading, writing, drawing, watching plays, and generally reconnecting with her passions as she seeks recovery. I'm so grateful that Gloria could join me in conversation. The beautiful and poignant speech you just heard her read was something that completely moved me when I first heard her speak. And I think you're going to find that we have a really interesting conversation about ways in which our culture struggles to help and support people with an eating disorder. So anywhere from diagnosis being too late, getting missed, especially if you're higher weight, especially if you're a person of color, the resources it takes to afford recovery. So we delve into those topics and much, much more. I'm hoping that as we launch this conversation during National Eating Disorder Awareness Week, that folks can really help amplify and learn something new and anything that we can all do to help reduce the stigma that exists with who gets to have an eating disorder, who gets treatment for an eating disorder. It's really important. There's so much shame that's involved, based on the biases we have, that it's sort of, a young teenager kind of white girl's disease, and eating disorders do not discriminate. And if we all understood them a little bit better, we would all be able to do better at providing the support and care that is so, so necessary for people to get the healing that they deserve. And if you have available resources, I would encourage you to offer up a donation for a worthwhile organization that helps to support eating disorder recovery and people who might not otherwise have access. So I've got some links to how you can be more involved in Eating Disorder Awareness Week and also offer support for those in recovery. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Please share this episode and don't forget to subscribe and rate and review for Body Kindness. Wow, Gloria, thank you so much for reading that letter. It was really, really, really powerful to hear your words. I wanted to first ask, when did you write this?
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. So I first wrote this, I want to say back in September. I was invited to speak at a congressional briefing for the National Eating Disorder Association, and I wrote the speech for that presentation. So, yeah.
So we met each other at that panel. That was the first time I heard it. That was the first time you read it.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I had so many, I had a really visceral reaction to what you wrote because I could relate to your words with respect to some things I'm already seeing in my own family and school. But I'm going to put a pin in that for now and go more toward this, helping listeners understand, how this came to be. So you are a spokesperson for Nita or an ambassador. And can you tell me a little bit more about that connection?
Yeah, so I would say right now I'm best described as someone who writes about eating disorders, specifically just through my positionality of being a Black woman. There's so much, malrepresentation of what the disorder looks like, and just culturally speaking, it's typically represented through rich white women. When in actuality, it's a very diverse disorder, and it can attach to anyone. So I just kind of write about that a lot. And Nita found one of my articles, and it's been kind of spreading around. And they invited me to come speak with them. So that's kind of our current relationship.
Okay.
Which is really cool.
Cool. Well, I think that your voice is very powerful.
Thank you.
You need to keep writing for sure. Writing, speaking, podcasting, all of it. Because you're right. Your story is really powerful and needs to be heard. And I want to delve into that, as well as the ways in which we're not meeting the needs of people of color and other marginalized folks when it comes to eating disorder recovery. Because I think we both know we've had sidebars about what a terrible job we're doing.
No, for sure.
And so the theme for the During Eating Disorder Awareness Week for 2020, the theme that Nita is running is "Come as You Are, Hindsight's 2020," and it's encouraging people to share their stories of what we're learning when we go through eating disorder and body acceptance journeys, and how the greater community is affected. So they're really encouraging conversations with a priority on inclusivity. So that piece of it, have a conversation and prioritize inclusivity. What do you make from that, given your experiences with an eating disorder and being a Black woman?
So I think that, I'm glad to see this kind of push towards including other people, including other stories. But I think one of my biggest critiques of this idea of inclusivity is still that there's still like an otherization of other stories that are not white. There's still this idea that like at the center of eating disorders, like the normal story, quote unquote, is of this like, anorexic, like white woman who is rich and can afford treatment. And that's like the normal stories. And then everything else is at the periphery, so the trans man who goes in for treatment, like his story is otherized, or, the fat anorexic who goes in for treatment, like her story is otherized. When in actuality, like the stories at the periphery right now are the ones that are most common, So there's statistics that like less than 10% of people represent the actual, diagnosable traits of anorexia. And to me, that is really interesting, because it kind of just depicts how what we commonly refer to as like the normal stories of eating disorders are the ones that are least common, but continue to be put forth as the ones that are most common, meaning everyone else who doesn't fall into that category feels otherized. So I think that my biggest thing for Come As You Are inclusivity is just to make sure that when we are being inclusive, we still don't, in our attempt to bring people together, act as if their stories are not normal just because they're not as common, when they are really one of the most common experiences of what disorders actually present and like look like.
What you're arguing is a lot of the stories that we don't get a chance to hear are likely much more common than we think, and much more the norm than we think.
Exactly, right? So I think that, I'm a huge supporter and in favor of Nita, because I think they're one of like the biggest, brand of disorder advocacy that has been very cognizant about representation, about, who's at the forefront, who's telling stories. And they made a big effort, and more than I've seen from other groups, to be honest, to make sure that like, when you Google Nita, .org, or just like Nita in general, you see a wider representation, right? But I think that generally in inclusivity, and when we have a week of advocacy and a week out of like, complete year dedicated towards telling marginalized stories, it still treats them as novelty, right? Mm-hmm. Like this idea that like you bring on, like the video promotion, or you bring on and promote people of different races and genders and sexualities as if their stories are the most uncommon ones. When in actuality, if you were to like throw a ball into a crowd of Black women, we have such a high percentage of eating disorders, right? But we're still uncovered for some reason. Or in the trans community, they have one of the highest rates of disordered eating, as well as in queer communities as well. So it's this idea that like, I think that inclusivity is important, right? Because there's still this lack of representation, understanding from the public about what disorders look like. But we really need to make sure that when we're talking about inclusivity, we're not treating it as if, the story of the typical story doesn't always mean like the white rich individual, right? Because that's actually not the most typical one is at all. There is actually much wider array. And I just kind of want to make sure that they're not, there's not a novelty to stories that don't look like that.
Mm-hmm. I think it's an excellent point, and I think it's something we need to keep at the forefront, because I think that, yeah, there can be this feeling of like inclusivity, good job, check box. And it's like, I think the real work is continuing to lean into the awareness and the meaningful action, and the awareness and the meaningful action.
Absolutely.
Which makes me want to pivot, to talk a little bit more about your experience that you laid out eloquently in the letter, and your journey through eating disorder recovery and the system. Because we know like maybe some things have changed, and we could maybe acknowledge that, but ultimately there's a lot that hasn't changed. And so I'd also like to include conversation around how we know it exists today. And can I ask, like, how do you identify? Like, do you identify as recovered? Do you identify as in recovery? Is there anything that you feel comfortable with sharing about where you're at today as far as well-being and your relationship with your eating disorder?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think I identify as in recovery, not because I don't think and it's interesting because I think that like, even when I've been in treatment, I've still been in recovery, but I'm in treatment and I'm not in treatment right now, but I'm still in recovery because I really do think that there is this like nonlinear, almost just like negotiating process when it comes to eating disorders, right? Like, I think that it's something that like you have to keep doing every day. It really reminds me of like sobriety in a way. Like it's something that you just have to keep recommitting yourself to daily to like make the right choices about, like what am I going to eat today? Like what am I going to not engage in today? Like, so I think that even though I feel very educated and pretty solid, I still identify as in recovery because I think it's still this like constant maintenance about, respecting my body's needs and just making pro-recovery choices. And I also think that recovered kind of gives it this like final sense or this like final bus or final hurdle to recovery that I just don't really resonate with. Because I think that you can still have a bad day and still be in recovery versus like if you're recovered, so to speak, and you restrict one day or you purge or do another behavior, then it almost feels like a complete slip, right? So I think I identify as in recovery. Though I would say, I've been treatment free for like a couple months now. And that to me just means like, only outpatient and not like any kind of formalized like eating recovery program. So that's been cool. And I think I also identify as just kind of like, definitely taking much more into this idea of like still following a meal plan, but like less formalized in the sense that I can trust myself to eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks, and not really have to like rely on the rigidity of like a meal plan. So yeah.
And how would you say life is different for you now than when you were at your lowest point in your eating disorder?
That's a really good question. It's such an interesting question because it's like I would say the main difference is, well, so I guess all physical differences. I mean, and I won't even talk about weight. I think that's just so irrelevant. Physical differences, I am much warmer now. I was very anemic, so I was very cold all the time. Just like having more hair, healthier skin, like all the kind of things, all the things that are the opposite spectrum of illness. So like, full, like redder cheeks. Let's see, like my nail beds are healthy and not breaking. So like anything that you would associate with someone who's like dying,
Hmm.
I don't really have those things anymore, which is super cool.
Yes.
Um, I would say mentally, I just feel like much more present. I'm remembering more. Just like things like that. But I think the biggest thing I can identify is just that like when when people say their world gets small, I think people forget like how small like that can look like. Like it small means like you wake up and your automatic first thought is like around food or around something to do with sort of behavior, or you trim your life into ways that suits this disorder. I think the common belief with eating disorders is that people can go about their daily lives and still function because their health is intact, right? But people forget that your life revolves around this concept of like weight loss or whatever need your disorder has to satisfy, right? But I think that my life has a lot more room in it now to do other things, to focus on other pieces of work, to travel, to just experience things, and to not be so self-hating in so many ways that would require me to just be at home all the time. So I think that's the biggest difference, because I think sometimes like people are so focused on like the outward appearance of how one changes that they forget that like there's a lifestyle that has to accommodate an eating disorder. And when you're in recovery and when you're making decisions that are recovery oriented, you can't like really operate in that same lifestyle.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. And um, I think that as someone who works with people who are at various stages of eating disorder recovery, right? You're at the hopeful place, the place where many hope to be. And also still very human, right? So we take it day by day. So when you were reading the letter the first time and I heard it, and you mentioned elementary school, I mean, it just like my heart just stopped because I saw this little version of you and all the trauma that you began to unravel for us. And what made it especially hard for me is as I was listening, so I could resonate in several pieces in some of my own experiences, many in experiences I've had with clients. And so it was this feeling of like, this is not one rogue, really messed up school that got everything wrong in a normal society. Like, this school is a product of our culture and it's still happening today. And I personally know that to be true because even the slightest little thing that happened in one of my daughter's gym classes that may have been well intentioned as part of the DC mandated wellness education caused her to restrict her food. And thankfully, we were able to like unravel it pretty quickly and course correct. And I'm fully expecting that there will be more things like this down the road. But for people who are listening and who maybe didn't have that experience, or, you want to believe like, oh, this is just, a rogue situation. Like, we need to be really clear that this happens every time, every day in schools all around the world. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And I'll start with elementary school because I think high school, oh my gosh, but I could not agree more. I think that, our culture is so ingrained with this fear of, fat. Like it's not even a fear of, I don't think it's a fear of disease. I think it's a fear of fat and like what fat represents culturally, socially, etc. I mean, my gym teacher is not rogue. She came out of a physical education program that teaches things like health and body and things. And I have friends who have the exact same upbringing where you have someone teaching you about calories and about like fatness and stigmatizing different foods and like the pyramid where everything you're not supposed to eat gets put at the top. And just and it's like of course there are these like really mandated educational programs, right? But it's even the more in social ways where your teacher is like talking about like food one day and health, and they're like, "Oh man, I've had too many cheeseburgers in my time," so like comments like that, which students latch onto because like our educators are criminalizing the same foods we eat every day. So I think that it's not a road teacher, and I think anyone who thinks that hasn't been in a school for a long time because I mean, my when my little brother was in school as well, the same kind of health. I remember reading his health book, and it's the same health book that I had. It's in our education system, and it's teaching children wrong messages about food. I mean, kids are taught all the time that sugar is this like invisible enemy that we need to be like meticulously attacking, which is like just scientifically incorrect. So there is this whole generation being brought up that to think that like certain foods are bad, that we need to exercise more, that our lives are at risk because of the way we eat. And yeah, it's like everywhere. So I really think that anyone who thinks that it's like one teacher gone wrong or even one school district gone wrong does not understand how all encompassing this is right now.
Mm-hmm. And, at that age, what is appropriate social emotional development for a child is thinking, am I good or am I bad? Am I good or am I bad? And like, that's basically it. And so if you layer those two things together, what's the child most capable of thinking about? And they're literally being taught good foods and bad foods. Like when my daughter broached the subject with me and she was in kindergarten, she's like, why are cheeseburgers junk food? And I was like, what? Who am I fighting? I was like, what happened?
Yeah.
But it is literally, it's like, it's that is good or bad. And then we look, you're right, with the textbooks, it's baked in. And those silly integrations, right? Oh, well, we're teaching them, we're teaching them math by teaching them calorie counting. It's like, yeah, not helpful.
No.
You can teach math some other way.
Right. Sit with like flowers or something. I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, the sooner it starts, the worse it is developmentally. When we go through puberty, a time when our bodies are supposed to be changing. I mean, we're supposed to be following our growth curve. It's that helping a child grow, in a healthy mind body way is really not as hard as we're making it when it comes to like diet culture is really messing it up, and so we're all size diverse. We are all supposed to be gaining weight during puberty, and we become hyper aware of our appearance as part of our development and kind of, and so there's part of some element of that. But at the end of the day, the issue is always going to come back to if there are good bodies and there are bad bodies, then that hyper vigilance around our own appearance is going to be even harder for the bodies that are bad.
Mm-hmm. Right. And also just to say that like gym teachers and health teachers and teachers in general, they're people too, and they are also, being educated every day on diet culture and in a fat phobic society. So they themselves will make judgments on what is good and bad bodies, right? Like I think people think that educators are above the trap of good and bad, and that it's something that like children assign value to, but like we're assigning value to this because our teachers are saying this. I mean, how many teachers in gym class have, shamed the slowest kid in the class for not running enough laps in gym class, or how many teachers have like celebrated the fact that like so and so is working out so hard and doing so many reps as like a celebratory thing, while then putting everyone else down who's not. So again, like teachers are, being educated as well in this, and then giving this information to children who are really just taking it in. So I really think that also sometimes people mix it up and think that children are just coming up with this, but like it's being directly like taught to us.
Mm-hmm. Can you recall any time in your experience where like, I mean, in the school system, did a grown-up ever stand up for you? Like, was there any bright moment that you could remember at all where maybe you were not given the message that fat is bad and fat is the thing, because that's basically, we have all the power, right? Like if we could take one school community, right? And that school wellness policy. And if we could say, we also want to include eating disorder prevention in our wellness, and it's in our school values, to promote well-being, right? And self-care at all sizes and for all people in our school community, right? And attached to that underlying that, right, and attached to that is disbelieving in that obesity epidemic myth, right? And that myth that fat is bad. And, when you said earlier, you said, I don't really think it's about disease, but, that it really stuck with me. I think people would like to say that it's about disease, but it is really about size and hating larger bodies.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I'm sitting here thinking, like, really, I'm really trying to think, like, did I have any teacher? So not really. So I had a teacher in seventh grade, Mr. Matsumoto, shout out. I remember cooking for him, and I remember him being like very encouraging of cooking for him, just because I think he thought it was like weird that I would cook. It wouldn't be like cupcakes. It'd be like things that I myself wouldn't eat. So I'd cook a lot of like red meat. I'd cook like hot dogs and like brought it in, and like I cooked like a thing of cheeseburger and brought it in. And he was like encouraging of that and was kind of like, like this has way too much salt in it, because like I was really bad at cooking, right? But he was still like, oh, like, like you should try it at home and like, keep cooking and stuff, right? And he was like a science teacher, so he was encouraging in that way. But no, I didn't have teachers who, outwardly were like, oh no, like, you can be whatever size you want and still be healthy. Like, not really, because because a lot of the times the way it gets mapped on this like lesson about like being bigger is bad. And also I will recognize that in a lot of my like, disordered states, I have completely like exaggerated my weight and size, because it was so like dysphoric to me that I couldn't even like accurately remember what I looked like as a child. But I remember very distinctly having I had an assistant principal at my like second elementary school, the last one I went to. And I was wearing the school uniform, and she like pulled me aside in front of my peers and was like, "You can't wear this to school anymore." And I'm like, "But it's the school uniform." And she's like, "Okay, but it doesn't look right on you. Like, it's too short, and like it's not the right size. Like, blah 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 blah." Like things like that. Like I can count like so many of those experiences where like under the guise of like the dress code, or under the guise of like school assignments or curriculum, being like shamed by teachers. But I cannot recall for the life of me enough times where teachers have been like, like, oh my gosh, like so like encouraging when it comes to food weight and size. And that's disappointing, because I think it just reflects like, a lot of the times that like teachers just got it wrong. I think it just reflects that, and like also just the ways in which like there's not a lot of good systems in school where children can advocate for themselves against teachers. I think there's like a lot of ways in which teachers and administrators can like penalize children or report children to their parents, or even like use things like police systems to like punish students, which I could like talk about all day. But there's not a lot of systems for the reverse, where students can advocate for themselves in the face of feeling like, humiliation or like discrimination or things like that.
Mhm. What do you wish a teacher would have said that you think maybe could have saved you pain and suffering? And we're not trying to hypothetically, and it would have prevented my eating disorder. Not that far, but just
Yeah.
what does your heart say about like a hope or a wish? Like, what do you wish would have
Is this
happened?
in elementary school still, or?
It could be any time. You could take
Okay.
me wherever you want to take me.
So I would say elementary school, I think it was so disappointing, right? Because we only had one class. So I would say that I think I would want a teacher to in elementary school. I think just I don't want a teacher to just have a little more, like, I think have like a little more respect for my adolescence and childhood, in the sense that I think that I came from a school that like had a lot of we were I think we were, what were we called like one of the gifted schools, or whatever that even means. I don't even know what that means anymore. But we were one of those schools, so I think a lot of times teachers approached us as if we had some kind of like higher emotional capacity. And also I think that a lot of times like Black children are regarded as being adults. So a lot of the more like emotional wellness check-ins that like, white peers get, but does not happen for Black students. Like, we were
Mm-hmm.
regarded as being like emotionally mature already and already having it all together. So I think that I would really appreciate having a teacher with more, respect for my adolescence and childhood, because my gym teacher and we actually got into a lot of arguments in class because of the things that she would say around like, just like, so I remember like she was like really upset that I would not like weigh myself or whatever. And we got into like an argument around that. And I think that like, instead of having that like a check-in about it, I got punished for it instead. And I think that like I would really appreciate teachers that would have more respect for my childhood and not so much categorically seeing me as like an aggressor. And I think in high school, I think that's when I showed the most obvious signs of some kind of disordered eating or some kind of like honestly mental illness. Like I remember I wore like a winter coat in school like every single day. Like you would never see me without a coat. And I feel that like to me, if I were a teacher, and I did have teachers who would occasionally ask like, "Oh, are you okay?" And I'd be like, "I'm fine." But like if I were a school counselor, like a teacher, and like I kind of saw that behavior, and also like I would always be like in a computer lab working during lunch. Like if I kind of saw those things, like they to me just like they're pretty obvious signs of some kind of like discomfort with self, and also like taking advantage of opportunities not to eat. Like I think that I would be pretty on that. So I think just again like having I think I would really appreciate just having someone in the school system where I spent like so much of my time, because like you spend like 8 hours in school a day, with like more just concern, more urgency.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's such like a lack of urgency for Black students. I really just appreciate like more urgency and concern, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a clear gap when schools are thinking of their wellness policies, that they're not, that they're not even thinking about eating disorders at all, let alone what are the signs, let alone that could be at any size, etc.
No, absolutely not. I got more education on like, like
How
where
to
to
have an eating disorder, right? Like what to do.
I got right. I got more education on how to have an eating disorder and like where to hide during like I don't know like a school shooting
Oh,
than the roles of like mental well-being, that most of the time, and like most of my knowledge about eating disorders came from like the internet and Googling, which like goes to show how lack of education there is like around that subject.
that's interesting you mentioned that. My next question was going to be, who was the first person who said to you, you have an eating disorder?
That's really yeah. So unofficially, I guess the first person was some random person on Quora, because I remember I used the anonymous like question thing to be like, hey, like, I think I was like I was definitely like 13 or 14, but I was just like I feel weird around food. I have all these weird things that happen, but I don't think it's serious enough. And I remember just like being like, hey, like this and this is happening. Like, what do you guys think? And the obvious response is like, I can't diagnose you. But there was this one dad on the site whose daughter had anorexia, and I remember him being like, I can't diagnose you. And this very clearly sounds like exactly what my daughter is going through. You should consider reaching out to like a parent or like your school or whatever. But I know that officially what like actually prompted me to go to treatment was the therapist I had when I was a first year in college. Like her name was Nadia, and she was very helpful. And very much like, like I know this is what you think eating disorders have to look like, but that's incorrect. And you have one, so consider getting treatment. So she was very like helpful in terms of that and helping it not seem so like foreign, and just kind of being able to be like everything that you're reading, I can like very much apply to you. So yeah,
Okay, wait a minute. We need to rewind because you
yeah.
you how did we get from elementary school early education on how to hate yourself and not take care of yourself to all the way to college?
Yes, right.
Why?
So
Why so long?
I think it was like I know, isn't that sad? I mean,
Mhm.
so I think it was though, like first off, their like mental health resources are so inaccessible when you're a child, right? So like my own parents, God bless them, they didn't have a lot of education about mental health or like where to go if your child has issues with mental health, right? So, I like there was not a clear path. Like if I had the flu, right? It was very very easy to be like, oh, we're gonna go to like a GP and get help, right? But like if your brain is sick, there's not a very clear idea of like where to go to like get that taken care of at all, right? But I think also it was just that like it was just like I did not present as someone who had an eating disorder. So even though it was like very and like I also would say I had a very ideal household for masking an eating disorder. So like, my parents worked during the day, so I'd go home at night. And I was like we're a very independent family. So like it wasn't like someone was watching me eat and like making sure I finished meals and stuff. And also I was very, very, very active after school. So I would like join a bunch of like clubs and stuff and like be very busy and be like very much be like, oh, have I had dinner yet? Like, of course I have. I had it like after like debate team, which was like a lie. So it was I was in a very ideal situation for an eating disorder to happen. But I think that the biggest thing was just that like a lack of education combined with being like having very like invisible symptoms and also just combined with like not having like a lot of the physical manifestations, right? So I wasn't fainting and I wasn't like, I don't know, but I don't know. I wasn't like having heart attacks, like, the kind of like very dramatic, but also realistic representations of what it looks like, right? But it was very much more subtle like that. It was more like my nails are breaking and I'm cold and like my hair's falling out, but things that like I think can be very missed if you're not looking for them,
Yeah.
But I
Like
also would just
it's
say
like
that like, go
yeah, I was
ahead.
just gonna say it's like hidden in plain sight. Like, and you even use the word invisible
Absolutely.
symptoms. Like they weren't. Your nails are breaking. Your nail, but so it goes back down to eating disorders don't have a look, and that's the problem with the system. And like you were bringing up in the beginning, is that we think they do have a look.
Absolutely. I think that if someone had made me, I think if one doctor or teacher had me fill out a survey, like asking questions, 'cause I remember using the Nita tool at one point that was like, hey, like, like look like Google if you've been eating disorder, if you think eating disorder, and I used it and I like got a very much like a you should probably get checked out like right now score. But it's like even though like I didn't know what to do with that information. Like who do I go to with that? Like I go to them with like an online quiz and say like, what do I say about that? And also it's like, like people don't know how to handle that news. People don't know what to do with that news. And I remember I had a counselor at school, I think, and she was someone who could have actually been very like helpful and transformative, I think. And I remember just being like, I was crying in her office about college apps. So we're in senior year of high school, even though this has like been like a 6 year rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just being like, this is just really hard. Like, I just feel so stressed. Like, I never have time to eat anything, blah, blah, blah. And I remember like just kind of like telling on myself in a way that I think was like, I was just kind of really desperate. And her just kind of being like, everyone's going through this. Like, like it's okay. Like after college, after over, it'll be better. And again, it's just that kind of like normalization. And like, it's like, if you don't know what you're looking for, then you're not going to find it really.
Mm. Yeah, it really exposes I mean, just through your story, again, I'm being kind of hit again with this powerful message of like waiting so long. And it does sound like, size had something to do with it, right? Not looking what we imagine, what's in the textbook, what was in the after school special. And then, like you also mentioned earlier, race, right? Like if you're in elementary school, you're being treated as an adult. If you're a Black girl struggling with an eating disorder, you're not necessarily seen as somebody, right, who is struggling. You want to talk more about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, for sure. I was about to say that like I think people think that and I think this is one of the most like insulting stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
People think that like eating disorders are a like disease of vanity and it's still this persisting thing that just
Mm.
does not make a lot of sense to me. Like people think that it's a disease of like, oh, I want to look a certain way, period, but they don't really understand the value that people have behind like weight loss or behind whatever function it serves, right? So, as if I'm in school wearing a parka every day and wearing the same like leggings and like sneakers every day and not a very fashionable like high schooler, like then why it's not going to cognitively make sense to you that I'm struggling with like anorexia if you believe it to be a disease of vanity. Like if you think that it's a disease that I want so I can look like a model, than if I'm this like unfashionable, quiet person who's always studying. Like it's not gonna make sense that like this is something I'm struggling with, versus like, you know, my disorder serving a much broader function of control or having tools like that that make a lot more sense. So I think that like that's one of the biggest things. I think that a lot of the times for especially for like Black women, it's like, we this idea of like thinness as an aesthetic is something that people assume isn't really in our wheelhouse because of how like I guess things like having like a larger ass or like bigger hips or whatever seems more like culturally favorable for us. But like also people forget that like weight loss for a lot of people isn't like about like aesthetics. It's about like survival and about like wanting to be like humanized in a world that like goes so far as to like dehumanize and humiliate people that are fat like all the time. Like even this idea of like more plus size clothing and Beyonce's Ivy Park line or like, having seatbelt extenders are things that like people who are like of like who are non plus size have gone so far as to like deny and slander, So I think that a lot of people forget that like people want to lose weight and people engage in disordered behavior not to like look a certain way, but just because of this idea of like how much like looks and like weight loss and weight are like based upon how much you're treated like a human in the world.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's, being a health at every size clinician, I think a lot of people confuse, they think that, oh, you judge a person if they want to lose weight. And it's like, oh my gosh, never, right? Like,
Mm.
I would never judge a person for that because look at how bad our culture is. I mean, who wouldn't want some freedom from that stigma, from who wouldn't want more social power in any way they could get it, especially a woman of color.
Exactly. But I remember making that connection for the first time when I first wrote about like having an eating disorder and how it intertwined with being Black. And it was
Mm-hmm.
just like, I like in childhood, like high school, like I thought so many like life hurdles were like inaccessible to me. Like literally, it was the idea of like being in a happy, functioning romantic relationship felt so foreign and impossible because I regard myself as this horrifically ugly, horrible person, right? So it's just like I think for me a lot of times, and I can't speak for every Black woman, like obviously, but I think for me specifically, it was like this idea of like losing weight and like becoming smaller was so important because it meant that like so many things that I think a lot of people take for granted just felt more accessible. Like, I remember just like reading all the statistics that were like Black women are like least likely to get married and to like have children and to like have a job, etc. And like all these like really just like messed up things. And just being like, okay, well, like I'm already in a playing field that says that like I'm not supposed to be like happy or functioning or like self-sufficient, like this is something like I have to accomplish or like I'm doomed basically.
Yeah. It's layering pain upon pain upon pain. And it's one of the reasons why it's like 2020 and we're, you know, just kind of trying to come around to all the elements of wokeness, right? And just this idea of the system and structure is the problem. The system and structure is the problem. And that's still not even mainstream awareness, right? We still have a very powerful diet culture. Now masking is like health and wellness, right? They're
Yeah.
sort of trying to adopt body positivity. Somebody was complaining that like the Noom app was advertising. It's like, it's a non-diet way to lose weight or an anti-diet way to lose weight. Is like where I need to punch a wall or something, right?
Right.
I do want to pivot to a really important topic, and that has to do with the treatment of eating disorder. So we know there's a major gap in even identifying who gets to have an eating disorder. You had to wait all through elementary school and get into college. And finally, thankfully, you had a therapist who was able to say and do the right things that could help you take the next important step.
Yeah.
So
Shout out to
hearing that, right, is the first step. But then there's a whole access situation. So what can you share about your experience and, ways we need to fix things?
I mean, oh gosh. So I think the first basic thing is I just want to cover the bases and say that like having health insurance helps a bunch. I mean, being in a place that has like living in Chicago, like a city that has like a number of centers in the city and also in suburbs also helps, right? So there are structural things that are helpful, right? So just to like cover that, I think that like there is a gross amount of places in this country where you have to fly and live away from your job, live away from your family to get treatment. Not to mention the amount of like centers that are not, have no credentials to take advantage of that kind of desperation as well. But I will say within the treatment centers, specifically for like women of color, and not to mention even like queer or trans women of color as well, in those intersections, there is a like devastating lack of understanding and like and cognitive, belief about how to handle this, right? So for one, I have been to like I want to say I've been to like probably four different varieties of treatment centers. So not four different types, but like like four different like types of centers in four different kind of companies. And I've only encountered like one woman of color therapist. I only encountered like one woman of color dietitian. And to say that like I really just want to stress for people listening that it's not just a question of like an aesthetic that I need to like have someone who like looks like me to like be able to have successful treatment, but like there's this whole very meticulous experience and also this like level of trust, understanding, and vulnerability that has to happen. And it's really hard to happen when there's like these power dynamics in the room, right? So I remember that like I had a woman of color therapist in college, and that was really helpful because like these eating disorders like OCD were things I had not really understood or been very versed in. So I really needed someone I could like trust and someone who like at least I didn't have to like re-educate in order to like get care and treatment. But these like short-term stays in like residential or even in PHP, they happen so fast, and it's a lot harder to get things out of them when you have to do like the work of like explaining why this thing bothers you, like explaining, for example, like why it bothers me when like I get pushed when like people bump into me in the sidewalk, or like why it bothers me at school when like I don't know, like some other kind of microaggression happens. Like having to do that work takes away from the treatment experience, right? So there is like a very like tangible deficit that happens when there's like a lack of representation. I'll also just say that like a lot of the times when it comes to meal plan prepping, there's not a great like awareness of how to make it affordable, right? So I remember early on in my recovery, like I really needed supplements, but they are so expensive. Like it's really expensive. Like Boost, Nestle, I could be your sponsors, like because it was just so much money has to go into the things. Like even things like protein shakes and protein bars are really unaffordable. But there's even like this idea of like a culturally like what people eat. Like I had a really great dietitian at the nutrition clinic, Abby. Shout out to her because she like made a meal plan that was very much based in like what I eat at home, so like Nigerian food, and that had like never happened before, right? And it's just like it's much more doable to have like a meal plan around what you actually eat in a day versus a meal plan that's like made up of foods that you've never had before and most likely will not like buy and like actually like take part in. So I think that like these are some of the barriers that like I think treatment needs to make progress in, because it's very like expensive to go to treatment. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of like a lot of like vulnerability and like trust that goes into it. And it's like really disappointing to like go to treatment and like make yourself vulnerable to that process. That's very much like it kind of like it's very self-stripping. Like you do like trust a lot of people and like rely on a lot of people. And it sucks to like go into that and then have to do a bunch of work to make it even like accessible to you that other patients don't have to do at the same level.
Absolutely. It's so much emotional labor. And how are you supposed to do all that emotional labor and prioritize recovery? You're not supposed to be the helper. You're supposed to be being helped,
No, seriously.
right?
It's really frustrating because just like it's ridiculous in a way because I actually makes me laugh at a certain point because it's like it's weird going in there and being like, and these are very short relationships that you're developing, right? So like it's not like, oh, we've been patient therapist for like 5 months or like a year or so, and like I'm we're working together and mutually building up trust. It's like you have to go in there, get treatment, and then like go into the real world, and you just like spend half that time having to like explain your basic, like how you operate in the world. And I remember like having to like literally send article links for people to read. And, you see them like once a week and you're only there for like 4 weeks. So you spend like one session being like, okay, read these two articles that I have published, like, some kind of, it's bizarre. And then they like come back week two being like, oh, I didn't read them, but can you like explain it to me again? Like, it's just like, that is so much work and wasted time that has to happen. And imagine how much of that could be like mitigated if you can get people there who have like have a more expansive understanding of how other people live, who can do that work, right? And women of color therapists won't just serve women of color; they're helpful for everyone as well because they can bring in their own perspectives with eating disorders and just life in general to be helpful to other patients. But it was very much a deficit that I kept like I've encountered like at every single center I've been to so far, except for one.
And I'm sure dietitians as well. I have a good friend who is a co-founder of Diversified Dietetics, and it's a nonprofit basically trying to help dietitians of color, like graduate them through their internships, right? Because it's at least 98% white. I might be off by a little percentage points, but once we're in the 90s, we know there's a problem, right? Can we say that?
Right.
And then anyway, so we know that there are structural issues with even getting the scientists to even get a nutrition degree, then to even get the internship. But there's even power dynamics in the internships and racism in the internships. And so, it goes everywhere, and it is a really important structural deficit to call out. And I'm really appreciative that we are able to talk about this because you're not going to have change without conversation.
Right. I also will say a big one that I keep hearing over and over again is diversifying the size of dietitians. Like it is, I mean, it is just I remember like we as patients were rioting at one point because all our dietitians were under like aesthetically under a size 8, and we had people of like all shapes and sizes getting treatment. And it's very, and in a way it's like, it's weird to call someone else's body triggering, but it's a very like obvious difference when you're a patient who's getting treatment and your dietitian is like smaller than you. And not to say that like, we should like exclude those bodies, right? But it's when every dietitian, is like that same size, it's very obvious, and it can be very harmful to plus size like residents as well. So really just focusing on like making sure that if we're saying health at every size, why is everyone giving us like advice and professional help, below like a size 10?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know if I think it's weird to call another person's body triggering. I mean, I know you mean to respect people by that, but you're not sitting here choosing your triggers. It's not like you're sitting there going, I'm going to choose this. It's happening,
right.
And it's a reality, and it's about meeting your needs, period. I also know that you want to talk about a lack of a binge eating disorder treatment.
Oh, yeah. I think that, so I myself do not have binge eating disorder. And I think that a lot of times, like people who have restrictive disorders think that we do because like anything that's normal feels like a binge. But I will say that I think it is a really sad reality that treatment for binge eating disorder looks like weight loss treatment most of the time, like and that to me like makes absolutely no sense. It's a very easy way to like symptom swap. It's also very much like, it can be very isolating within centers when you have one person getting like weight loss advice, another person being told to eat more for both sides, and these are both realities that need help, right? And both are serving a similar function of trying to satisfy something emotionally broken, right? So I think that a lot of times we need to do a lot more work and research to figure out, what is a way to responsibly help people who have BED that is not going to result in like telling them like you need to eat less food, which is often not even like the actual case anyways.
Right.
I think Nita has done a really good job of this as well about educating them. I know someone who works in the more executive side of things comes from a BED specialization. So it's really exciting for me to see them kind of give space for this issue. Cause I think a lot of times that like disorders are presented as only being like, restrictive or like centered around weight loss. and I catch myself doing this as well. And I would love to see like more, centers figure out ways to treat this without it coming down to like, oh, try a diet,
Mm-hmm.
I'm remembering back to a certain Netflix movie, what we shall not name,
Yep.
that like, what, yeah, we won't name it, but the one character in that had BED was like just eating peanut butter, and I was just like, this is like
Mhm.
gross, but also like it's interesting to kind of show that like a lot of times treatment boils down to like, hey, like eat less and like exercise, which is like not, and it's like all, and it's interesting because it's never really about treating the actual like cause of like
Mhm.
binging or the cause of like manipulating food in that way. It's always
Right.
about treating the size of someone,
Right.
which is like,
A
but
diet.
yeah,
Which is why it's a
right,
diet, right? Were you
yeah.
speaking about Shavis Turner at Nita, who
Yes,
has the
I
yeah?
was.
I love her.
She's
Yes.
awesome. She's great.
Yeah, and she originated Beta, which then joined Nita, and so yeah, Nita would not have their binge eating disorder progress, in my humble opinion, if it weren't for Shavis, and she's doing amazing things for the eating disorder field, and especially helping to address weight stigma and eating disorders, having a look, and these issues, a lot of these issues that we've talked about today. But you're 100% right. I have seen treatment centers sell binge eating programs, and one of the benefits is like selling that weight loss is a benefit of this program. Like that is a hard pass. No, I'm not referring anyone to you for any reason if you're going to do that. And outpatient, I see a lot of times an outpatient where they say that they do whatever the term is. I've seen weight loss and eating disorders, but I've also seen like healthy weight management. And it's like,
Yes, that
no,
is a
you can't
favorite.
do
That's
both
a
those
favorite.
things.
No, that's a favorite one. I also I see a lot. I see things like, you know, diet management. I see things like take control back of food, like just like things that are associated with like losing weight, basically, and just like really just forwarding restriction as a tool, which like is not makes no sense.
Yeah. It's why we have to really eradicate weight stigma from eating disorder recovery and from our culture, because it's harming people. And I think that's, if we had to sum up, what we're trying to bring a conversation around today is that there's harm seen and unseen, and there's still a lot more work to be done. But a lot of what our different threads circle back to is this idea of, what do we consider a good body and a worthy body? And as long as it's the thin ideal, as long as there's a universal one, and as long as there's not diversity, as long as fat bodies are not seen as good bodies, as long as Black bodies aren't seen as good bodies, as long as able bodies are the only good bodies, etc. I probably miss, but as long as we have those norms and standards, there's going to be a lot of suffering. And I wanted to offer you the final word and the closing note. I had asked you earlier, I said, what do you wish a teacher would have said to you? And so I actually want to offer you the floor to just speak from your heart to anyone listening, or just say kind of, what is your heart telling you that you want to make sure everybody who is listening hears from you?
Oh, God. I always just take the last minute to say that, like, there are so many people right now who are in recovery and it's not going the way they want it to go, who are on the cups of recovery, who are in the depths of their eating disorders, who are, on the cups of relapse, and all these different places and things, and all with the same goal of just kind of like stopping this pain we don't understand with the only tools that we do understand. And I think I just kind of really just want to encourage people to really, seek out treatment, prioritize recovery, take the steps up wellness, do the vulnerability needed to get help. If that means talking to, a friend, speaking to your parents, which is like which is really scary. But it does help, talking to a counselor, talking to the online chat helpline, calling the NEDA helpline, talking to Project Heal, like all these different resources, finding some, you know, DMing me on Instagram and Twitter. Like, my DMs are open for this purpose. Do it, right? Because, I think especially in the hype of New Year's and all of this nonsense around like new body, new year, new me, or whatever the fuck people are talking about, we really kind of forget the danger of eating disorders and like what it can really steal from our lives and just really shrink in our world. So I think I just want to take a minute to say that, like, every body is good body. Recovery is worth it. It's definitely hard, but it's worth it. And if you're not recovering, you're really dying. So there's been a lot of new steps in making treatment more accessible, and at the very least, making the very diagnosis step more recoverable. So, all of these different like online forums from NIDA, Project Heal, etc., that kind of allow people to go through this initial screening. I really just encourage you, if you're someone who's like, you're like kind of like, should I not? You have nothing to lose. Hit that chat button. Just like speak to someone. If you're wrong and you don't have one, then you're wrong, but you might be able to save your own life. So I would just really wish everyone that joy and the ability to like really advocate and take care of yourself, because this is a scary thing. But all I want in the 2020 is for everyone that has an eating disorder and doesn't know it yet or does know it yet to recover and to really just live our best lives, because we can't do it when we're disordered.
That's the truth. Gloria, it has been such a gift to have this opportunity to talk with you today, and I'm really grateful. And I can't believe you said your DMs are open, because I have your Twitter handle and your Insta, so I'm putting that in the show notes. But where would you like people to connect with you, to find and follow you and connect with you, and possibly even reach out to you through a DM saying that they need some help and support?
Right. I think that Twitter is always the best place. GA and my last name, Oladipo, like the basketball player, or Instagram. I will always, I'm not a licensed anything. I only speak from my own personal experience. So I'll always refer you to like resources I trust, like NIDA and different treatment centers, right? But, I'm always here to talk and like really be a support to survivors. And I'm always writing about my experience and always just kind of like randomly posting about something new I've cooked that I couldn't have cooked a year ago, or being like, LOL, like just got through another episode of some like recovery show, like Jan Levanzan, who I love, or new books. So I'm always just kind of posting like little clips about recovered life that was definitely not imaginable like 2 years ago. So those are great ways to follow along and just kind of, I like to think I'm kind of funny, maybe. So those are just like two opportunities and stuff.
I think you're definitely funny, and more than that, you're a talented writer and advocate, and I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me, seriously.
And that's our show. The podcast is made possible with support from listeners. Please donate to help offset production costs at gofundme.com/bodykindness. And please rate and review the show when you have a moment. It really matters. Let's keep the conversations going on Facebook. Search Body Kindness and request to join the group for Body Kindness readers and listeners. Have a question for us to answer on a future episode? Visit bodykindnessbook.com/question. Body Kindness books and audiobooks are available wherever books are sold. To request a signed print copy, visit bodykindnessbook.com/order. For other questions about this podcast, please email info@bodykindnessbook.com.